as well as Twitter. Welcome to the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. We bring you the best in the quality content when it comes to property every weekday at 7 p.m. And of course, I never go alone, because now we've gone from just having this podcast, every weekday at 7 p.m. to adding other quality shows that really do better your property journey and help you along your property journey. And I'm sure a lot of the Top Fan gang know exactly what I'm talking about. Every Wednesday at 7:45, we have SD Classen, where we have the first time home buyers show. And the new kid on the block, of course, is the farming podcast that is on Tuesday and Thursdays at 1 p.m. You also do not want to miss that one. I think I've already, watched a few of the episodes when it comes to farming. I have a small little interest in, stepping into agriculture. And I think that podcast certainly helps you understand what you're about to get yourself into and really broadens your horizon about what is possible if you ever considered agriculture, particularly when it comes to farming. And over the weekend, we also don't forget about you. We've got the Developers Show with Chad that is at 1 p.m. on Saturday and Sundays. And of course, we get to profile some of the best estates and complexes that the country has to offer. So we always have something on offer for you right here on the Private Property Podcast. So you're never alone. There's always a resource that you can tap into when you're interested in property, whether you're a tenant, a landlord, or of course, simply shopping around and you're still trying to decide what it is that you want to do. Or perhaps you're a seasoned investor and you've been doing this for a while and you now want tips and tricks in how to best navigate and scale your property portfolio. We certainly are your number one go-to platform for all those matters. Well, this evening we're looking at something very legal, something we're always going to encounter when we look at property. And oftentimes there's so many questions when it comes to this one, right? We're looking at the ins and outs of the property transfer process. Oftentimes people, will ask questions like, I've signed the OTP, they know attorneys have gotten involved, but they don't quite know at which point can they actually still pull out of the deal. What are the repercussions? What actually goes into a property being transferred? What's the difference when you're sort of buying it cash versus when you buy it with a home loan? How do the lawyers get involved? What can they not do? And of course, one of those contentious one is when you're buying that property, we know that oftentimes it is the seller who appoints the transferring attorney. And sometimes people tend to have questions along those matters. Well, if you've ever had any legal matters when it comes to the property transfer process, and you do send your questions and comments, I certainly want to hear from you whether it's always been a smooth process or you've sometimes had a few hiccups along the way. And to help us better understand what the property transfer process is like and what are some of the perhaps hurdles we might face along the way and different ways that we should be managing them, it's a lady who needs no introduction to the Private Property Podcast family. We've had it before. She's a trailblazer, and that's, of course, Nompumelelo, who's the founder and director of NS Xulu Incorporated. Good evening, Nompumelelo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zama. Thank you so much for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. I think one of the great things is, legal matters. I always say I'm a bit of a nerd. I took a few law courses in undergrad. So talking legal matters always fascinates me, especially with people who, went on and completed their LLB, did their articles, because then they're able to cite even more interesting, cases when we do examples. Whereas when you look at, what you did in law school, they're interesting, but they're not as interesting as the ones that you would typically also get exposed to when you further your law studies and then obviously go on and get admitted. So I think, Nompumelelo, the best place probably to start when we look at the property transfer process is perhaps give us an overview of how the property transfer process works, because oftentimes people stumble with this one, and sometimes there's just misconceptions about at which point has ownership actually happened? At which point can I pull away from a deal? And people always just have, question marks when it comes to these matters. Perhaps first, before we even look at the nitty gritty, just a nice overview of how the property owner, the property process, the transfer process rather, essentially works.
Sure. So what typically happens is that, you will sign a sale agreement, also known as your offer to purchase, OTP. A lot of people like calling it that. Sometimes you will sign it privately, where the seller and the purchaser get together and they say, okay, they agree on the purchase price and they agree, the purchaser will agree that he likes the property agree on the purchase price, and then they'll enter into a sale agreement together. Oftentimes, you'll find that the seller has approached an estate agent to market the property for him or her, the purchaser would then approach that estate agent, and a sale will then take place, where the estate agent will then prepare the sale agreement and make sure that it's signed in accordance with the law by both the seller as well as the purchaser. It will typically have the parties' names. This is just a normal sale agreement, being both a private sale agreement or a sale agreement that you sign with the estate agent. So it will typically have the parties' full names, the parties' ID numbers, the parties' marital status. It will typically have the purchase price, as well as the description of the property that is being sold. It will then also state how this purchase price is going to be paid. Will it be paid in cash, or will there be a cash deposit of a certain amount, normally being 10% of the actual purchase price, and then of course, once that's been stated, also there may be a mortgage bond, or if it's going to be a full mortgage bond, where the full purchase price is going to be secured by a mortgage bond. Of course, then that would require a letter of approval from the bank, stating that that they've approved the full purchase price, and that will be paid upon registration or transfer of the property in favor of the purchaser. What else is there? If the purchase price is going to be secured by just straightforward cash, sometimes there's no deposit that you would pay, where the purchaser will just pay the full purchase price into the conveyancer's trust account. Now, very, very, very important, Zama, is you do not pay any funds as the purchaser to the seller. There's no, okay, if the purchase price is 100,000, okay, I'll give you 10,000 rand now, and then I'll give you the 90,000 rand, on transfer. No. A lot of people have been burnt with that one. So, purchase price that is paid with regards to a transfer of property must be paid to the conveyancer, and that conveyancer will hold those funds in trust, in their trust account. And then once they've been paid into their trust account, they'll make sure that they get the purchaser to sign an authority to invest, okay? So that those funds are then moved into an interest-bearing account, so that the purchaser then gains interest on the purchase price, pending registration or transfer. Okay. Also, what my boss my ex-boss, my former boss, always used to say when I was doing my training, whilst I was still a candidate attorney, with regards to that is, buying property is like going into a supermarket and buying bread. You take the bread and you leave the money right there and then. You don't take the bread now and say, oh, okay, guys, I'll come back next week and give you your 15 rand later, or pay a deposit of like $7 today and say, oh, okay, I'll come back tomorrow with the rest. When you take the bread, you take the money. So it's an exchange between the parties, and that's exactly how I'll say the transfer process works when it comes to the purchase price and the property. On the same date when the purchaser takes transfer of the property, the seller gets their money, being the full purchase price. Okay, so that's that aside. What else is in that sale agreement? The parties will have signed. Sometimes there will be witnesses also involved there. Typically 2 witnesses that would sign. Sometimes not. Sometimes the parties will sign that agreement before a conveyancer or before the estate agent, and the estate agent will then also sign and confirm the actual commission. Very, very important, Zama. That commission that is payable to the estate agent must be stated so that it is clear to the seller how much money is going to be deducted from the purchase price and pay the estate agent's commission. Okay, if they say 4.5% of the purchase price inclusive of that, make sure that they've stated there. What does that mean? You know, for some people, they don't actually understand what 4.5% inclusive of that is, you know, or 4.5% exclusive. They don't know. So very important. Ask that essay. Okay, you say 4.5% here of the purchase price inclusive of that. How much is that? Let me see it. Let's see. So that, and also, you know, as a conveyancer, when the transfer instruction comes to me as the conveyancer, I need to confirm that with the estate agent as well. They kindly confirm your commission. You know, write it down so that I can give you an undertaking that once the property has been transferred, because I will be holding that purchase price, it will be in my trust account, and I have to pay you as the estate agent before I pay it to the seller. You know, I need to make sure that I know exactly how much to pay you. So that's very important. Right, so that's the sale agreement concluded. And it's not only the sale agreement that the parties can enter into. Sometimes parties wish to donate properties to each other. A very important question that I typically get from people, being clients or sometimes people who are just calling to inquire about what to do. Some people want to donate properties, some people want to sell, and they want to know what the best route to go is. All I can say on that one is there are tax implications, okay, with regards to donations and sales. So be very mindful of those. Okay, you don't want to conclude a sale agreement or a deed of donation without knowing what tax implications each one will have, and particularly because SARS will demand its tax based on the fair market value of that property. So always know the tax implications before you conclude any sale or deed of donation, because trust, SARS is going to come for their tax.
Look, I think if one thing is clear, SARS always gets their way. I think with many of us know whether they get it in this financial year, the next financial year, or in 7 years' time, they just always find a way to get their money. So I think there are many people you can avoid. SARS, unfortunately, is not one of them. If anything, perhaps explore legal ways of structuring your estate in such a way that you pay as little tax as possible. There are legal avenues to explore, but don't go, don't try and evade tax, because there's always quite a high price to pay for that one. Nompumelelo, I actually want us to look a little bit at some of the mistakes that you see with that sale agreement, because I think one of the big things that we sometimes happen is not every offer to purchase, I'll say, meets a good test of a good offer to purchase. Sometimes people thought, but I signed and I thought that, everything was included, or they perhaps didn't read everything. You were saying some of the particulars, for example, that would typically be in your offer to purchase. Sometimes you'll find that people are signing an offer to purchase that doesn't have a clear F number and, address. And you're thinking, but where is this place? You can't just have a random street name and that's it. Perhaps just take us through some key mistakes that some people do sometimes tend to find in the sale agreement that we should be looking out for, because you also don't want to have that get stalled. Because oftentimes, by the time you probably, share it, let's say, with the bond originator or even the bank, they'll then go back to you and say, no, it doesn't have detail X, Y, Z. Please make sure that it's properly filled in before they can obviously, continue with the transaction. But what are some of those things so that we're able to just spot them from the get-go, instead of kind of having issues with it and essentially just stalling our, the purchase process even further?
Of course, lovely. I love your question. Brilliant, because a lot of people get caught up with this one. And you know, Zama, what I always say, it will not hurt you to just call me. You know, call a conveyancer, anyone that you know, and just that does convincing. I promise you, I will not charge you for you asking me to just, can you just vet my sale agreement? You know, I've entered into a sale agreement here, and I really appreciate you. You know, or this is my draft sale agreement. Can you please just, you know, quickly look at it, and see if, you know, it's okay for us to sign. You know, some people will charge you maybe like 300 rand, 500 rand just to vet it for you, but that won't hurt you, because I mean, looking at it, like at the end of the day, the financial implications of you entering into a sale agreement of a huge amount of money, as compared to a 500 rand charge just to vet an agreement for you, you know, will just, you know, just it doesn't make sense. So that's the first thing, and then the second thing, Zama, is the person who's even selling this property to you the owner of this property?
Yes. Yeah.
Yo,
Because I mean, I've heard so many horror stories when it comes to that one, right? And to the point where I think that the level of fraud is so sophisticated that either they're producing documents that say that it's their property, you know, the banks perhaps don't do a thorough check, and they take it that the documents that have been sent to them are authentic, and monies get transferred only for the rightful owners to suddenly emerge. And then you find that actually you have a bond essentially now that you have to pay for a property that essentially isn't yours, because you're now fighting the alleged you know, rightful owners, and you're thinking, but I have a bond. I think never mind people who buy cash, so they don't need to deal with the banks. You know, your money is gone. But I mean, I'm now looking at people who are going to be servicing this this facility for the next 240 months. Chances are, you know, only 10 months in, you realize that this wasn't actually a property that belonged. Yeah, and I think that's certainly one of the you know, issues that we've certainly seen. Nompumelelo, I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go through more of those mistakes and how we can avoid them. Because I think one of the big things, especially for first-time new home buyers, and even property investors, and you know, property investors who are looking to invest, let's say in townships, this is also where we're seeing it a lot. I mean, I've been dealing with a few of those cases where you're struggling to trace the rightful owners of a property that you're interested in buying. It is in a township. People say it's our property, but you're not quite certain if that actually is the case. So how do you then go about authenticating, you know, the owners, so that you're not giving money to the wrong people and essentially end up finding yourself in very long legal battles? We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, I want to hear about your property transfer process, whether it was the first time you bought your property, or perhaps it was the second, third time that you went through the property buying process. How was it? Was it a smooth and seamless process? Were you scared? And I remember the first time I did it, it was 2 properties simultaneously, many different emails, many different lawyers, slightly confused, a little bit overwhelmed.
Lots of costs.
It's a lot of cost. But I'll share a little bit of that experience just after this break.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy it's even coming through.
It's even better. It's actually even better.
Okay.
all my windows are open and now bugs are
Oh, is it mosquito season already?
Yeah, but not mosquitoes, like that bug that likes that.
Oh, yes, I've seen them at home.
Brown one, yeah, it's that one.
The brown one, yeah. Oh, is it everywhere? I thought it.
No, it's just one. And even the other day, another one got in. So, and I'm
Honestly,
not
thought it
closing the
was by
windows.
where we're staying. Oh, okay. I guess it's the season.
Yeah, no, it's slowly that season now. Back to episode 134 of the Private Property Podcast. Well, you know what girls talk about when we're off on a break, whether it's bugs or certainly talking about the awesome time that we're having while we are on air. That's certainly what Nompumelelo and I talk about off air. Even before we actually went live, we were running on about property and just the amount of work that is currently, happening within the property space. So I'm glad that you got a little bit of a nice snapshot of what we talk about when we take that quick break. Well, of course, I am speaking to Nompumelelo, who is the founder and the director at NS Xulu Incorporated. We'll talk about the ins and outs of the property transfer process. I certainly want to hear from you at home around your own property transfer story. I was saying earlier that, the first time I bought property, it was quite overwhelming. Because I went and I, bought two simultaneously. I thought, what, I'm 26, I want to buy myself a 27th birthday present, and went and shopped for two properties. And so just having to deal with multiple lawyers and all kinds of communication, being asked for all sorts of supporting documents, additional documents, having to wait for the seller, one of the sellers that, if I remember the first two, which ones were I think this one, the other one, one of the properties, they hadn't paid their rates in quite a while. So getting the rates clearance took sort of longer than anticipated. It was round about this time of year going into the festive season. I probably identified it round about this time of year. So we started probably around about October-ish. But then the transfer hadn't happened come festive season. So my December's usually about trying to see if that transfer is going to go through, before the deeds office closes in December, and then the deeds office closed, in December before the matter came up, and then was only lodged into the new year. And so really trying to sort of piece together what the process was, getting the statement, I'll say every week at the end of the week from the conveyancer say, this is where we are on this matter, this is, the update on the matter, really does open your eyes up to how the property transfer process essentially works like, and some of the things that you should be looking out for. I think I'm very grateful that as that was happening, as overwhelmed as I was able to ask my conveyancer questions. And I think if you get somebody like a Nompumelelo or the conveyancers that I had, they were quite helpful in just explaining, okay, this is essentially what's happening in the property process, and this is what you should be looking out for in the transfer process. This is typically how long this stage would take, so do be patient. And I think a lot of us who are doing it for the first time, you're sometimes feeling like, oh my God, this is so much. But I certainly want to hear from you what your process has been along the journey. And I see we've already got some questions here from our YouTube viewers at home. And we've got one from Chris Kayoshe who asks, what's the difference between an offer to purchase and a deed of sale?
Well, it's the same thing. Same thing. It's an offer to purchase, it's a deed of sale, it's a sale agreement, it's an OTP, same thing. They essentially mean the same thing, contain the same thing, and that's it.
Perfect. And Chris Carello again saying, often the base document I am given is an OTP, and when signed, that it is, and in other instances, I am getting a deed of sale. So essentially, Chris, that answers your question. It's effectively the same thing. Sometimes the right sale agreement, sometimes the right offer to purchase. Sometimes it really does depend on the, the agency that the seller is essentially working with and the wording that they're using at the top. But the general details, like Nompumelelo had said, that are in the actual document themselves, that's what's important, because that's what the conveyancers are going to be looking at. That's certainly what your bank is going to be looking at before they say, yes, we're going to grant you that home loan facility. So Nompumelelo, we're looking at some of the perhaps mistakes that we should be looking out for when we are now dealing with this offer to purchase, because there's so many mistakes that we do find that often can sometimes cost us quite a bit of time, sometimes even money, because there are certain things that have to do with money that are in that offer to purchase that so many of us probably aren't aware of.
Okay, so before we actually go into the actual transfer process, okay, let's just deal with your queries, Zama, that you raised before we took a break about what do you do to make sure that you've protected yourself and you know that the seller is the actual owner of the property. Contact your conveyancer and ask them to do a deed search for you. Alternatively, if you don't want to contact the conveyancer, go to the deeds office and say, kindly do a deed search for me on this property. You will ask the seller for their title deed or a copy of the title deed. Ask them for it. They will give it to you. Of course, they won't give you the original if they've paid off their bond or if they bought the property cash, but they can give you a copy and tell them that, no, I just want to do my research. Take that to the deeds office and they'll do a deed search for you. Or email me as the conveyancer. I've got access to the deeds office searches, and I will do a deeds office search for you, confirming who the owner of the property is, and if the property that you are buying is the one that you think that you are buying. Also available to the public, the municipalities do valuations, I think every 3 or 4 years, so that you know that, okay, is what I'm buying actually worth what I am buying for? That's free. That's for free. Go into your Google. Everybody has, a phone with Google now. Particularly municipality valuations. You'll pop in and you'll put in your property description, and they'll literally give you the owner of the property, and it will tell you the actual street address, which is probably what you would maybe be more a bit familiar with, and it'll also let you know what the actual value of the property is. Same with the city of Joburg, same with city of Tshwane, same with the Msunduzi municipality. I'm just giving you examples of municipalities that I deal with, normally on a daily basis. So it's public knowledge, and all you need to do is just take whatever information that you have, put it together, and do those searches. And it will save you time. Before you even sign that sale agreement, it will save you a whole lot of time, a whole lot of money, a whole lot of headache, and a whole lot of stress. And if it doesn't look right, what do they say? If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. And if it does not look right, and the seller is not the actual seller, or maybe you also have the title deed, and you're looking at the conditions and you're thinking, okay, what is this? I don't understand this. And you bounce it off a conveyancer such as myself, and I say to you, be careful. There's a restricted condition here. Sometimes what I've seen a lot is people selling their RDP houses. So they would have gotten an RDP house from the government, and also gotten their title deeds. But there's a condition on the title deed that says that the owner of the property can't transfer that property within a period of 8 years of taking transfer. And now the owner now wants money, and it's only been 5 years maybe of them getting this title deed on this property, and here they are trying to get money from you to sell something that they can't sell to you within that certain period of time. Okay, and if you knew all of this, you wouldn't have entered into any kind of sale agreement. You wouldn't have paid anybody anything. You wouldn't have been pressurized, because that's how it normally works. No, pay give me like a 10,000, we'll sort it out later, the balance later. And before you know it, you've paid a person money for a property that doesn't belong to them, for a property that can't even be transferred to you, or it's a property that belonged to their father, who is now deceased. The estate has not been wound up. This person has siblings. They probably don't want to sell this property. Before you enter into any agreement, before you sign anything, bounce it off a conveyancer. They'll check everything for you, make sure that your checks are done, and then enter into that agreement. Okay, so that's that.
And I think one of the things that's certainly clear is that we're going to have you back again, because when it comes to legal matters in the transfer process, so many of them tend to come up. I mean, I think one of the things I certainly want to explore in a different episode is around some of the restrictive conditions that a title deed would typically have, because I think when we now enter, we'll say, the township, property space where so many properties are, of course, available. We know that the township property space is a multi-billion rand, sort of industry, and there are different ways to tap into it. And various property entrepreneurs also want to be able to access that market. But when you don't understand, some of those restrictions on title deeds, what the types of restrictions even are, so the different kinds of restrictions one would typically get, and why it's important to be able to know about them, or if you don't know about them, then certainly be able to, dial your conveyancer and get a sense of, what does it mean when a title deed has these kinds of restrictions. Certainly is something that we need to always understand. But before I let you go, what's the one thing that you certainly want people at home, especially those who are either, looking at their first property, or perhaps have already done their first property before, are, looking at their investment property? What's the one really crucial thing that we always need to bear in mind when it comes to the property transfer process, and something we want to always have a good grip on, so that we have a really good experience during the transfer process?
Okay. Before the ad break, something that is very important came up. You told me that when you bought your first property, boom, transfer costs, bond costs. The seller also, so that's for you as the purchaser. The seller is also thinking, oh, okay, well, they told me that I'm not supposed to pay any costs, only to find, yeah, Mr. Seller, you have to pay for the estate agent's commission. And also, if you have a bond, let's say sometimes you don't have one bond, you've got two bonds. Sometimes you've got three bonds over that property. All those bonds need to be cancelled. And they are yours, Mr. Seller. So you are the one who's going to have to pay for those bond cancellation costs. Okay. A lot of people don't look at their mortgage bond loan agreements. So they don't see that fine print that says that when you want to cancel your bond and you've settled the amount, you're going to be liable for the bond cancellation costs. Okay, and then it comes up now that you're wanting to transfer the property. Oh my goodness, I've got a bond cancellation cost that I need to pay. Those will typically, come off the purchase price once the transfer has been registered. The transferring attorney will just make sure that they give the bond cancellation attorneys a guarantee confirming that they'll cover their costs. But that's for you to know. Also, there are compliance certificates that need to be paid, paid for. Those compliance certificates are issued by the seller, typically the electrical compliance certificate, the electrical fence certificate, confirming that all the electrical installations on the property are in order. Those have to be paid for by the seller. Okay. Also, if you're around the coastal areas like KwaZulu-Natal and Cape Town, you'll typically be required to get a wood borer or pest control certificate. That you will also have to pay for as a seller. If you have a gas installation on the property, you also need to get a gas compliance certificate confirming that those gas installations are in order. So that's it's not only the purchaser who has transfer costs and bond costs to pay, but the seller also needs to be aware of everything that they also need to pay for. Also, there's rate clearance certificates and levy clearance certificates paid for. Sometimes there's a restrictive condition that we just spoke about, Zama, where if you're buying in a scheme, like maybe in a flat, in a sectional title scheme, or if you're buying in an estate, then you anything now is buying in a typical gated estate. There will be a restrictive condition there saying that if you want to be a part of, this if you want to buy a property in this a gated estate or in the sectional title scheme, you need to have paid the homeowners association a certain admin fee, and those depend on how lonely or how posh that gated estate is. They can range between anything from like 2,500 to 4,500 rand, and that's money that you need to pay upfront. That's all paid before the transfer actually takes place, because you're going to need a consent from that homeowners association confirming that they are happy with the transfer taking place, and that will be lodged at the deeds office. So a lot of costs are involved, and yeah, that's the one thing that I'd like the viewers to be well aware of, that know the costs that you are going to have to pay. The last thing you want is to be right in the middle of a sale, not aware that you've got a 20,000 rand bill that needs to be paid before registration. Where are you going to get that from? What are you going to go get a loan that might affect your mortgage bond approval that you've gotten from the bank? That's the last thing that you want. Who's going to borrow you 20,000 rand, and how are you going to pay it? Because after you've taken transfer of this property, you're going to maybe have to renovate the property. There's just so many costs involved before the transfer actually takes place. And there are also a lot of costs involved even after the transfer takes place. I mean, the cost of moving, for instance, can be exorbitant. Forget the renovations. The cost of moving all in itself is it's a lot. So make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into, because it will involve a lot of costs. Okay, so and also just be mindful that banks could also offer you a mortgage bond a package where they would include your certain costs, like maybe they'll pay for a certain portion of your transfer costs, or they'll pay the full transfer costs, or they'll cover the full amount of the bond costs. So yeah, just inquire with the bank if you're finding that cash is a bit tight. I also know that if you're a government employee, the Department of Human Settlements also gives funding to its employees. Look at that, contact the Department of Human Settlements, ask them how much they would be willing to fund you or give to you, just to aid you in paying for costs or any other expenses that you might incur as a result of buying or selling a property.
Well, Nompumelelo, we are going to be there. I think one of the big things with that is just understanding that when it comes to the property transfer process, it isn't only the buyer that's going to be footing the bill or has to essentially budget for certain costs, but the seller as well needs to make sure that they've adequately budgeted for selling their property, because oftentimes we think the seller doesn't really pay anything out of pocket, but they essentially are costs that you're going to be footing along the process. So you also need to make sure that you are ready and that the funds are available, because those themselves could also, of course, stall the sale of that particular property. So do make sure that you also have your ducks in a row as the seller. Well, we're going to leave it there this evening. Nompumelelo, thank you so much for coming back to the Private Property Podcast and joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Zama. It's always lovely being on this platform. Love it, and continue doing great work.
Thank you so much. And that is, of course, Nompumelelo, who is the founder and director of Xulu Incorporated. It's always a pleasure to have her back. We're certainly going to be bringing her back some more here on the Private Property Podcast, understanding legal matters when it comes to our home ownership journey, whether you're a tenant, whether you're a landlord, whether you're looking at buying that first property, or certainly adding more properties into your property portfolio becomes such a crucial thing, that you have the right legal team, and you really have people that you can always reach out to in terms of, getting their legal services. We have shared her contact details down here below. So if you ever need to reach out to NS Xulu Incorporated, then do reach out to them for your conveyancing needs. Well, that's it from me, Zama Khumalo, and the Private Property Podcast team. It has certainly been a great week with you this evening. Thank you, of course, for tuning in, for giving us your time, whether you're watching us from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube. We always do enjoy having you with us and sharing your property journey with us. Then one of the big things is we're in your homes every evening at 7 o'clock, or of course the other different times where we have other shows. And we really do enjoy walking this journey with you and adding as much value as possible in helping you learn more about property so that you make better informed decisions. Well, it's a wrap from us here on Friday. I know it's, I think it's International Champagne Day. So if you are going to be popping that, bubbles, then do enjoy it. Of course, do so safely. I'm back on your screens on Monday evening at 7 o'clock. But of course, over the weekend, do tune into the Developers Show with Chad. And as usual, hoping you're going to have a safe weekend. And of course, staying home and staying safe during this long weekend. Well, not a long weekend really, but certainly during this long weekend. And I'll be back on your screens on Monday evening.
Hi, I'm Clifton Smithers. I live in Belito, where my partners and I run a business called Union 3. As a family, we chose to move here about 6 years ago. What attracted us to the area was the safe and relaxed lifestyle of the North Coast. We're surrounded by so much natural beauty, and we love that it's so casual. It's just not as intense as a busy city. In fact, that's one of the main reasons there's so many people moving into the area. There's some amazing lifestyle estates out here. We've got Zimbali, Brettonwood Estate, and Zimbiti, to name a few. The Belito Lifestyle Centre caters to everyone's needs. There's also some smaller commercial centres like Tiffany's and Salt Rock. There's some excellent restaurants to choose from, and there's a really wide variety of activities on offer. From mountain biking out on the trails to surfing at any one of the beaches, there really is something for everyone. This quiet little town really comes alive over the weekend. The live concerts and the farmers market at the Lychee Orchard is very popular. With the new international airport just 15 minutes down the road and the unmatched lifestyle that this place offers, it's no wonder that the North Coast is the fastest growing town in South Africa. My family and I absolutely love each other, and this is our neighborhood.